Welcome to this second video in our video series looking at the broadcast mixing setup at All Nations. We are going to look in this video at how to set up inputs and outputs, the devices that we're using, how to access those and adjust them for the given service. As we said in video 1, the first thing to check is your audio device setup. So I'm going to come up into preferences, down to audio and device, and I'm going to select, you will be able to select on the Mac Sunday Service Scarlett or Sunday Service, and that will set up all the devices that you need. Hit apply and OK. You may hear a noise, maybe a little bit of a pop or an activation of the drivers on the speakers as the computer is then connected to the speakers. There are two main devices that are set up within our audio routing for the Mac. That is our Focusrite 18i20, and that's the Scarlett that sits right in front of us in the studio, and Dante Virtual Sound Card. We will use a mix of these inputs and outputs to direct signal around the system to make sure that the mix can not only be edited and adjusted in the studio, but also heard in the studio, and then that processed and mixed sound can then get sent back out, so that at current it can be heard through front of house and sent out via OBS to our live stream. Let's start by getting some sound coming in to Reaper. Getting sound into Reaper is fairly straightforward. All we need to do is come in and arm each of the tracks. You can do this actually in using the mouse in Reaper by clicking this record button. I do it on this channel. You see and hear the microphone on the Mac that I'm using is now picking up my voice. Alternatively, if you're using our Faderport MIDI controller, on the left hand side there is a button which is labelled ARM. If you hit that, all of the select buttons across the top will change from green to red, and that will tell you whether which of the tracks are armed, and then you just select the ones that you want to arm. What we're doing by arming them is we're prepping them for recording, and you'll have seen that when I activated the record button that this menu box appeared. This enables us to assign any inputs that we like to this particular channel. Now I'm in mono because our violin would be in mono, and when I go to the drop down menu you see the input list that I have. I only have input 1 and 2 here on this particular Mac, but on the Mac that you will be using for broadcast mixing, you will have all of the Scarlett inputs and 32 mono inputs coming from the Dante Virtual Sound Card. Now, for an instrument output that is coming from our stage and going through the desk, the channel number from our desk matches the channel number on Dante Virtual Sound Card. So if we want to make the violin channel 1, what we're labelled as violin here in Reaper, which for argument's sake we will call channel 1 on the desk, we would assign it to channel 1 simply by clicking Bob's your uncle, it's done. However, not all of the scenes are set up that way. Some of them have drums on, some of them don't. So what you may find is you may come in here, go into mono, and have to scroll down, say if the violin is on channel 9 or 10, and you're going to select that channel number, the Dante Virtual Sound Card number, from that list. That's going to be the number that you select, the channel number that it is on the desk, and then you should be able to hear and see that is picking up signal. It's worth noting that what this is doing Dante Virtual Sound Card is taking the sound straight from the preamp. So we've got no processing coming from the desk, no gates, no compression, no EQ or limiting or effects. It's all completely raw and untouched, so that we get a nice clean sound to use in the studio. The same principle applies for stereo tracks, like the keys. Select it to ARM and go into stereo, and then you'll have the options, and you're looking for, at this moment in time, channels 7 and 8 on Dante Virtual Sound Card. Now you want to do this for all of your instrument channels, all of your input channels, so not just the band but also all of the microphones. Some of these may be set up in the template, but it is worth checking that the numbers that are on the Dante Virtual Sound Card channels that are here in Reaper match the ones that are on the desk. Otherwise, you could think that this is, and say that this is the worship leader, but actually it's another part of the system. Maybe it's the left side of the keyboard, or it's one of these mics down here, or it's something that's not being used. So check all of your channel routing prior to starting sound check, as it will save you a ton of hassle after or during sound check and during the actual service. The same principle applies if you want to connect an input from the Scarlett. We can, through the aggregate device that's built into Macs, we can do both. So we do the same thing. So if we're controlling the auto pad in the studio, or we're using, let's say we're using the TalkBack mic, we're going to arm it, we'll get the drop down menu, and instead of picking the your input from the Dante Virtual Sound Card, you will pick it to the relevant mic pre that it's connected to on the Focusrite Scarlett. So whichever channel number you've plugged the microphone cable into on the Scarlett, that's the channel that you pick, and then adjust the gain on the front of the Scarlett, and your TalkBack mic will be working. So those are inputs. To talk about outputs, I'm going to jump over to the mix screen, and I'm going to start with your master outputs. Now this will appear on the right hand screen that we have in the studio, and you may have two options that look like this, or you may have none. I'm going to delete this and we'll start with none. So if you have none, it doesn't matter what's playing through the PA, even if all your inputs are working perfectly, you're not going to hear any sound because the master level isn't being sent anywhere. So what we need to do is we need to come into your sends. So you see that it says sends/hardware outputs. You're going to click on one of the boxes, and you're going to select audio hardware options, and you're going to pick the appropriate one. Now, to make the speakers work in the studio, you're going to want it to be the Focusrite Scarlett channels 1 and 2, like I've got, or similar to as I have here. And then there might be a little noise in the speakers again, and you should be able to hear things coming from the auditorium through the PA. Then additionally, what you want to do is you want to set up another one, and this time you're going to scroll down to Dante Virtual Sound Card 31 and 32. These are the last two channels that we're using currently on a Dante network, and those are going to be the output channels that take the mix from Reaper. So they take the mix from this fader and take it back to the desk, and that's the sound that can be heard through our main PA at current, and that is the sound that gets sent to our broadcast mix. So you need to have both. Just because you can hear something in the studio doesn't mean that it can be heard on the stream, and vice versa is also true. One more point to note that you can do with the inputs and outputs. So if we're coming over here to our TalkBack mic, we wouldn't want our TalkBack mic to come through if we needed to say something to a worship team or to someone during the course of a service that's wearing in-ears, we wouldn't want that necessarily to come through master mix, so we'll take it off the master send. But what we can also do is we can assign this channel in particular or specifically to an audio output. And what that enables us to do is we can then actually send this channel here back to the desk so that it can only be heard by those using in-ears. So what I would normally do is I'd come in here and I would put the talkback mic onto channel 3 of Dante Virtual Sound Card. That's a mono output, and then that sends to a channel, to a fader on the desk. It's the fader labeled talkback, and it enables when I talk into the microphone in the studio. It doesn't come out of the speakers in the studio, but it means that the band can hear it in the auditorium, and if need be, we can put it through the PA for other members of the team to hear during a broadcast, which is quite a useful thing to be able to do. You can do that if the click is being routed, or cues and tracks are being routed as well through Reaper. So that covers our inputs and outputs and the setup of the broadcast studio. It's super important that you check the input routing and arming of all of the tracks before the service starts. It's only the input of the individual elements of the system, so all of the microphones and DI inputs, that need to be assigned to either Dante Virtual Sound Card or the Focusrite Scarlett. Your DCAs do not need assigning, and they don't need record arming, but we'll talk about DCA setup and effects setup in the next video.